Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. In this video we're going to read from Exodus 12 and talk about whether or not a little sin can cause death. We tend to categorize sins into big sins and little sins. For example, murder is a big sin. Telling a little white lie is a little sin. And we think that big sins are worse than little sins. But what we're going to see in Exodus is that even little sins can have serious consequences. We're going to see in Exodus that if the Israelites ate leavened bread at certain times, then they could actually be cut off from the Israelites. And then we're going to look at a verse in 1 Corinthians 11 that tells us that there are some little sins that apply to us that can have some serious consequences also. Now, before we get into that, let's establish a little bit of context. When we start reading at the beginning of the book of Exodus, we read about the Israelites moving to Egypt. They were there for several centuries. Eventually, the Egyptians turned the Israelites into slaves, and life got very difficult and bitter for them. Then we're told about Moses. Moses was an Israelite. He grew up as part of the Egyptian royal family. He was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. At one point, Moses had to flee Egypt, and he was out of Egypt for several decades, and then God told Moses to go back to Egypt, talk to Pharaoh, and tell Pharaoh to release the Israelites so the Israelites could go back to the Promised Land. Moses went back to Pharaoh. He did all that, but Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites, and so God gave Moses the ability to perform miracles and bring plagues upon the Egyptians to convince Pharaoh to release the Israelites. And so Moses did numerous miracles and plagues. Pharaoh was very stubborn and obstinate. He refused to release the Israelites. So eventually God decided to bring one final plague on the Egyptians. He was going to kill all the firstborn throughout the land of Egypt. And after that, then the Egyptians would force the Israelites out. And it's in that context we start reading in Exodus chapter 12. So we'll start reading Exodus 12, verse 1. Now Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's households, a lamb for each household." So notice they're supposed to take a lamb. Now if a household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them. According to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. Your lamb shall be an unblemished male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to kill it at twilight. So notice the lamb is supposed to be unblemished. Notice the details throughout this. They're supposed to keep it until a certain day, kill it at twilight. Moreover, they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. Notice they're supposed to take the blood and put it on the doorpost and the lintel. They shall eat the flesh that same night, roasted with fire, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Notice they're supposed to use unleavened bread as opposed to leavened bread. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled at all with water, but rather roasted with fire, both its head and its legs along with its entrails. And you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So again, notice the details. They're supposed to eat it with their loins girded, sandals on their feet. And notice that this is Yahweh's Passover. "For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh." So notice that God is going to strike down the Egyptians, the firstborn of the Egyptians. He's going to execute judgments. "The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." So again, notice a reference to the blood. The blood would be a sign. and that would protect the Israelites from the death that was going to afflict the Egyptians. And so here we see that not following some of these small details like where to put the blood could actually have consequences such as death for the Israelites. Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh. Throughout your generations you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So notice they were supposed to eat unleavened bread as opposed to leavened bread. And furthermore, anyone who ate anything leavened would be cut off. So again, when we think about whether you're eating leavened bread or unleavened bread, disobeying God in that instance would seem like a little sin. There's not that much difference between leavened bread and unleavened bread. But the consequences of this little sin for them would have been to be cut off from Israel. So there were some significant consequences for that little sin. On the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the 7th day. No work at all shall be done on them, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you. You shall also observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this very day I brought your host out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is an alien or a native of the land. So again, there's a command here not to eat anything leavened. And again, disobeying that command would seem to us like a little sin, and yet the consequences were that they would be cut off from the congregation. You shall not eat anything leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. And that's as far as we're going to read today. So again, just to review what we saw, the Israelites were supposed to take a lamb, they were supposed to kill it, and there was a lot of details about when and how they were supposed to do that, and they were supposed to put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, and that blood would be a sign that would protect them from death. And so failure to obey those commands, which seem like small details, could have resulted in death. Now we also saw that they were supposed to eat unleavened bread as opposed to leaven. And again, the consequences of that little sin was significant. They would be cut off from the congregation of Israel. And so again, we see that in their lives, small sins, little sins, could have serious consequences. Now we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 11 because we see that this is also true for us. So let's starting at 1 Corinthians 11, verse 27. And this is the passage telling us about communion, how to take communion. Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But a man must examine himself, and in so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink of the cup. So notice there's a reference to those who eat in an unworthy manner, and they will be guilty. Verse 29. For he who eats and drinks judgment to himself if he does not judge the body rightly. For this reason many among you are weak and sick, and a number sleep. But if we judged ourselves rightly, we would not be judged. So notice the use of the word judgment and judged. And notice that those who eat and drink in an unworthy manner would be judged. And again, eating and drinking with communion, you're eating a little piece of bread, drinking a little bit of juice, and doing that wrong, committing a sin in reference to that might seem to us like a little sin because it's just a little bit of bread and it's just a little bit of juice. But we see that the consequences for doing that, for that little sin, are significant. Some of the Corinthians were weak, some of them were sick, and even some of them were dead. And so again, what we've seen through all this is, or just to review, we tend to categorize sins into big sins and little sins. And there is some truth to that. Murder is obviously more significant than maybe telling a little white lie or eating the wrong kind of bread. But we see in Exodus that even those little sins can have significant and serious consequences. and also that we see here in 1 Corinthians 11 in our lives, some of these little sins can actually have some significant and serious consequences. And so the lesson for us is every one of God's commands has to be taken very seriously. And all of the details of God's commands have to be taken seriously, because even the little sins can have significant consequences. Thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. Bible Mountain exists to develop biblically literate Christians because the Bible is from God and each one of us is accountable to God for knowing and following the Bible. It is in our best interest to learn as much about the Bible as we possibly can. If you'd like to increase your biblical literacy, please join my email list so you can receive future videos via email for free. There are links on this video screen to take you to a sign-up page, or you can go to BibleMountain.com and click on follow. This is a free subscription and your email address will not be sold nor given away. Also, please use the share buttons on your webpage to like this video and share it with your friends. And once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.